Hello, everyone. I'm attorney Kelly Longtin from Kelly Longtin Law, and welcome to our YouTube channel. Today, I want to talk to you about what happens to your leased car if you pass away before that lease term ends. Now, after a house, a car is often the second most valuable piece of property that a person might own. About 15 to 20% of new vehicles are leased rather than purchased and financed. Now, leasing is a popular alternative to traditional financing because it can allow the lessee, the person who leases a vehicle, to drive a more expensive car on a lower monthly payment during its most trouble-free years. Now, at the end of the lease term, the vehicle can then be returned for a new, updated model. A lessee, however, does not own their vehicle. They drive it under a car lease agreement that is a binding contract. The contractual obligations of a lease can affect an estate plan, so lessees should understand what is in the fine print of their contract and what happens to a lease after they pass away. So let's talk about how a lease works. From 2015 to 2019, there are approximately 17 million vehicle leases per year, representing a third of all car sales. This was the highest percentage of leasing in history, but leases plunged when the pandemic happened, and now leases only account for about 17% of all new models that are delivered to customers. With the lease, the buyer and the dealer agree to a set term and a monthly payment that is based on how much the vehicle is expected to depreciate over the contractual period. Instead of paying an interest rate on a loan, the lessee pays the money factor, the money the lessor used to buy the car. Now, leases have mileage caps of about $10,000 to $15,000 per year, above which penalties will then be assessed. They also typically require a down payment, an acquisition fee, and a disposition fee to return the leased vehicle. Any damage determined to be beyond normal wear and tear could also result in some additional charges. Now, most dealers offer leases from 24 months all the way up to 60 months. And at the end of the lease term, the vehicle is then turned into the dealer. Although lessees do not build equity in a vehicle the same way that buyers can, if the car is worth more than the predetermined residual value in the lease, they may end up with a positive trade-in value. Now, ending a lease early can result in early termination fees and penalties. According to Consumer Reports, these charges can amount to thousands of dollars and could equal the amount of the entire lease term. But during periods when the used car supply is tight or a particular model is in high demand, dealers may be willing to make a deal that lets the lessee out of their contract early. It might also be able to transfer that lease to someone else if they're interested in taking it over. So let's discuss some lease options when the lessee passes away. So what happens to a vehicle lease when the lessee dies depends on the lease terms as they were outlined in that contract. And what you want to look for is an early termination death clause. The lessee's death does not alter the lease terms or cause the lease to automatically terminate unless it contains a provision that allows for early termination due to death. Even if the lease permits early termination in the event of the lessee's death, it may require a dealer fee along with the return of the vehicle. To prove the lessee has passed away, the estate may have to produce a death certificate and bring it to the dealership. If the lessee had fallen behind on their payments, the dealer might disallow early termination, repossess the vehicle, and require the estate to pay the lease balance. For a solvent lease, the dealer could permit an estate representative to transfer the lease to another party, including a person in the family willing to assume the lease. Again, it comes down to the terms that are in that contract. So you definitely want to read carefully. So let's talk about standard early termination. Ending a lease early, whether because of a death or some other circumstance, could trigger early termination provisions in the contract. This could result in all remaining payments on the lease becoming due, paying early termination fees, returning the vehicle, and paying the disposition fee. These costs can typically be paid by the estate. So let's talk about options with a co-lessee. Lessees do not own their vehicle and they cannot leave it to a beneficiary in their estate plan, but they may have a co-borrower or a co-lessee on that contract. Now, when there is a co-signer on the lease, that individual typically assumes financial responsibility for remaining payments after the lessee dies. At that point, the co-lessee could choose to keep the vehicle or look for a lease swap partner. However, some contracts prohibit lease swaps, limit them to a partial transfer, or have prerequisites such as only allowing swaps on a 4-year lease at that 2-year mark. Now, certain brands and dealers might have a contingency for co-lessees and the death of one borrower. For example, Ford has what it calls a peace of mind program that applies to select leases. If one lessee passes away, the program allows a co-lessee to continue the lease under the existing terms, pay off the outstanding balance, or return it to a dealership within 60 days of the customer's death without any remaining contractual obligations. A co-lessee usually cannot be added once the lease is signed, but while the lessee is alive, they can take steps to make estate administration as smooth as possible. Someone with a terminal illness might, for instance, terminate or transfer their lease early to avoid any complications in the estate administration process. Now, the fact that a lessee does not own their vehicle will likely cause it to be given very little attention in an estate plan. One way or another, unless there's a co-signer, the estate will be left to deal with an outstanding car lease. The options for resolving the lease agreement will ultimately come down to the contractual language and, to a lesser extent, the willingness of the dealership to negotiate with the estate. Now, following the death of a loved one and before contacting the dealer, an estate representative may want to contact an attorney to review that lease's fine print. That attorney can help explain how to legally terminate or transfer a lease per the terms provided in that contract. So I hope you found this beneficial. Just understanding gives you a better understanding about how leases are handled after someone has passed away. I want to thank you for watching. I'm attorney Kelly Longtin from Kelly Longtin Law, and if you want to learn more about estate planning and different topics, please like and subscribe our page below.